Welcome to the Culture Stew podcast. I'm your host, Maria Marukian. Throughout my career, I have supported leaders and organizations in their efforts to build thriving cultures that are strengthened by diversity, equity, and inclusion. Welcome to the first official episode for season 6 of Culture Stew, and also our 100th episode to boot. Yay! This season, we are focusing on the theme of gender equity through an intersectional lens. We want to spotlight the experiences of diverse women and femme-identifying people whose stories are often untold or misrepresented. And I am deeply honored by the lineup of incredible women who have agreed to come on the show this season, including our 2 guests this week. In this episode, we are going to hear from 2 scholars who are conducting research to center the experiences of Black women leaders. I know these 2 women quite well, having worked with both of them over the last couple of years. And our conversation is going to explore how to balance our passion for justice work with the need for rest and self-care, something very important and often disregarded by many of us. We're also going to discuss what their respective research has identified as the predominant challenges that Black women face, particularly in environments where they are the only. And we'll discuss what they believe is the call to action for all of us involved in justice work, but how it looks different based on the racial identities to which we belong. A little bit more about my guests this week. Devin Moran describes herself as a learner, teacher, educator, womanist, and passionate pursuer of educational equity. She is the director of social justice education at Northwestern University. And prior to that, she held positions in DEI and academic affairs and education for over a decade. She's also currently a doctoral candidate at Miami University, and her research is examining Black feminists, Black women's pedagogies, and intergenerational joy. In her spare time, Devin is usually surviving an Orange Theory workout or doing her best to be the fun aunt her sister's littles deserve. Jasmin Robinson is actually a part of the MSM Global team. She works predominantly with the Association for Animal Welfare Advancement as their director of DEI initiatives. She's also the principal of Ideal Education, a consulting firm that specializes in educational leadership and DEI. And she too is a Ph.D. candidate at Indiana State University, focusing on the experiences of Black women leaders in predominantly white spaces. Jasmin formerly served in student affairs and DEI leadership positions in several institutions of higher ed, including Elmhurst University, Lake Forest College, and Northern Illinois University. She is also an artist, singer, and chef. Without further ado, here is my conversation with the wonderful Jasmin Robinson and Devin Moran. Our focus this season is on the experiences of women and femme-identifying individuals, really looking at gender equity and inclusion through an intersectional lens. And so, I think so often we see the representation of women or the conversations around gender equity issues being presented in society, in the media, in this very sort of deficit-based way. And we often don't, I think, showcase that humanity that you were talking about, Devin, right? How are we amplifying and elevating the voices of women and people who have predominantly been pushed to the margins, been silenced, but not to just hear the negative stories, right? To uplift and share the stories of incredible strength and courage and overcoming immense adversity, and just breathing joy into our lives and our communities. So this is exactly why I wanted to have the 2 of you on here. Jasmin, tell us a little bit more about what drew you to the topic of focusing on Black women's experiences in white dominant spaces. And what are some of the things that you've learned along the way that maybe surprised you?
Mhm. Okay, how much time do we have? No, I think for me, which I didn't even really touch on my why yet, but it's very much wrapped up into my decision to pursue this topic. Um, I came from a background where we did not really understand or explore identity in the household. And so there was a veil, if you will, that was slowly being lifted through experiences that I did not really have the language for at the time, until I started going through higher education and doing more just research and taking time for my own journey. It was also during that time when I recognized an opportunity for me to um, move through higher education to a space that I thought would be empowering, if you will. So at the time, I was in higher education in a diversity role, and the goal was for me to ultimately become a chief diversity officer. Now, originally, my mentor wanted me to be a college president, and I was like, absolutely not. And so I was like, I can settle for a vice president, student affairs, or something along those lines. And then as I started doing more diversity work, I started to kind of reshape my thinking. I think a lot of times when we talk about DEI work, originally it comes off very performative if you don't have the training and the wherewithal to understand it. Against Devin's point, you're operating within an oppressive system. And I've said this time and time again, to me, anytime you're doing diversity work in spaces that are historically um, impose violence against folks or taken or challenge their humanity, DEI operates within that dominant lens. And so that means there will always be restrictions in that space. And so the further I started to go in that journey towards the chief diversity officer, the more I start to recognize the lack of awareness and consciousness, and just the lack of support for Black women, if you will, in those spaces. And so that became my why. I wanted to really look at the experiences of Black women who aspire to those roles and just decide on what does our work need to be in those moments. I think the other piece is um, recognizing the nuances that come with resistance, the work that needs to happen, the internal work that needs to happen for you to really understand what your positionality is. Because as Black women, we have a lot of these narratives that tell us who we are, how we should move, what we should do, how we should use or situate our labor. And that comes at a cost to us. And if we don't even have the resources to support that toll that it takes on us, then we're left at a deficit. We're left with nothing. And so I found myself going through the motions by the time I was ending my time in higher education, and recognized that it was a lot of violence in those spaces, a lot of silence and isolation. And just in higher ed as a whole, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but also recognizing that there was an opportunity for our voices to be amplified. And I wanted my research to do that specifically for Black women. I think a lot of times we hear this trope around, wearing wearing the cape or the Black woman schema, the strong Black woman schema. And for me, 2021, I was like, I'm taking it off. We've been in, in my opinion, Black women have saved this world. We created this world. We've saved this world time and time again. In 2021, for me, I'm like, that's off. Get somebody else to do it. And that's since been my positionality since then. I am more than willing to support folks who are interested in getting starting their journey, but it's not my responsibility for them to do the work on their own. I can only guide you so much, but it's not going to be at the expense of my well-being. And so I've really held firm to that. And I think even within that resistance, you see folks' true colors in a sense. Folks, there's always something they want to negotiate or something they want us to try to balance out or something we have to lose for them to gain. And I think that that's the part of our position in society that we have to continuously reconcile with. And there's not enough, in my opinion, community of Black women having these conversations and supporting one another. And so I want to be able to amplify voices in that way, to share what that community can look like and what that resistance can look like on our own terms.
Mhm.
And also, I'll say too, I think that because we are all human, because we all need to coexist and exist in this space, and because our society has organized us in the way that it has, that work has to look different. And so I'm not so much concerned with folks that are who are not in the global majority, what that process looks like, as much as I'm really focused on, if you will, repairing the harm and the trauma that's been caused from people of the global majority. And so I try to center my work in that way. Also recognizing I've been socialized in a way that's going to require me to do work while I'm also supporting people who are doing their own work. And so that's kind of the in between I've been in for a while. I know Devin and I talk about this all the time, kind of where we started versus where we are now. And I think at the end of it, the goal is psychological safety. The goal is peace and joy and love. And I think that that's what we all aspire to do while we're doing this work. And so we have to keep that at the forefront.
Devin, your focus is on joy, right? And so where's the where is the balance, or how do we hold the harsh facts of where we are in terms of our current state and the immense um, challenges and dangers that we face doing this work, and also create space for joy and liberation?
There's like a dozen answers I'm thinking of to that question. Candidly, and I think this is like maybe like a lesson inherited from like maybe my family or my ancestors, or a learned lesson like in my profession. But as a Black woman, I don't in this body have the opportunity to be mediocre. I don't have the opportunity to bend to mediocrity either, right? For my own survival. And so if that's true, and I want to live that authentically, I got to worry about mine, and that's it, right? So I was like, if I'm going to ask a question and research and land in a place that is unapologetic, I'm going to talk about how we as Black women teach joy to one another, like, because that is our hallelujah chorus is what I call it. Like our yes, I see you. Like all the little things that like I understand as a language to, from Black woman to Black woman, come what may. Like that's what I want to nurture and keep for myself, keep for the next person, right? Because I feel like that gets pulled and snatched away from us Black women so very quickly. Or it gets, oh goodness, that becomes like less of our story, right? Like Jasmin's achievement to a position, a title, right? That becomes the thing. But like you could be completely joyless in that role. That is not liberation. That's not freedom. Like I would be so proud and excited, and I would hype Jasmin up no matter what Jasmin decides to do. But at the same time, I, as another Black woman, and be like, are you okay? How's your joy? What's bringing you joy? What's bringing you peace? Like those are the things that we teach, but we don't name. I think the hardest part is intellectualizing some of this, because joy is so interconnected in politics, in social justice, right? If there is legislation saying, I'm not going to feed you, I might have less joy if I can't eat or afford food, right? So like there's so much intertwined in like how we name it or make sense of it, that it intellectualizing it has been the feat. But I do feel like the balance of like I guess I'll go back to an original question you asked, if that's okay. But it was just about like, how did I come to this research question? It was like a response to like the mediocrity I was seeing around me. I, again, from Kentucky, was thinking about the huge impact that Bell Hooks left on amplifying like her identities, and kind of naming like things, like being very explicit about what type of life we're living, how we don't get to heal without community, how we don't get to live in creativity without critique. Like there is an opportunity to be constructive in the way that we see one another, see the things that are output, right? We live in a capitalistic society, so produce output, like that's what we know. We get to critique it. So bell hooks was very explicit about that. And then you have people really responding in a beautiful way to like, oh, that makes sense. I understand that. At the same time that a Black body is being murdered for no reason other than being in its house. And so I was just like, both of these realities are so close to me. Like, I understand what it's like to figure out what it means to be a Black woman in Kentucky. Like, I hated living in Kentucky growing up. I couldn't wait to leave. And so I understand like these um, nuances that Belle loves about it, but then also is creating space to talk about differently. And then I also know that like there is harm in this state. Like, and I could be in my bed and be impacted by that harm. The danger is very real. And I was like, it's just grief season. This sucks. I don't want to talk about it. I kept it very like grief, joy. Like, so I'm just gonna flip the script. They're really close cousins. That's what I found in my research. But like WAP came out. Do you remember that song?
Yes, I do. Yes.
WAP came out and I was like jamming, like, because I was like, oh, it's so much fun. It's so crass. And I just needed a little bit of that energy in my life at that time. But then I started paying attention to the commentary around it. And I was like, again, more mediocrity, right? Like, this is so tired talking about a Black woman's body as if. And I was like, I actually don't even think that people are paying attention to the fact that these two Black women are saying, you've already told me my body is an object. Like historically, this has been the truth for me, right? So what I'm going to do in this song, this artistic expression is say, all right, if you tell me it's an object, I'm going to tell you what I want you to do. Like they took a little bit of power like back and I was like, yeah,
Yes.
go Black. Like I was so excited and like jamming all at the same time. And so it became this like, what other ways are we like decoding and speaking to one another that really like breaks down these realities and like gets us completely detached from like this mediocre stuff. Like I feel like if I'm watching a debate, if I'm listening to certain people, I'm like, I already know what you're gonna say before you say it. It's like the same tired stuff. Like, and so now I'm just like, let's live in the creative. Like, let's live in the like the joy of something independent from like the stuff. It's still there, but it's just like I can choose not to. I can choose to, you know, talk about my body in a way that like gives me pleasure and then therefore gives someone else permission to have pleasure. And I'm not talking about just like sexual pleasure, because that's what that song was about, but like delight and like a number of different things. So I think that's how I combat like those harsh realities. My dad, I was just telling you, Jasmine, not too long ago, my dad often says like, stay angry. Right? That's a trope of Black women. Like we're angry if we have an opinion, if we have ideas, if we just speak up and assert who we are in a space. Um, and I think my dad knew for survival, you need that anger in order to be a critical thinker, in order to know when to stop, in order to say like, okay, it's time to have my joy over this, whatever it is that I'm seeing. And so I really try to like lean into that. Now it's taken, we're gonna roll up almost 40 years, right, to get there, but we're there. I keep aging and dating myself this whole conversation, but I'm proud. It's okay. It's fine.
That's
And by
another thing we
extension,
can be
me.
joyful about. Yeah.
You're younger than me. I'll say that. You're younger than me.
That's part of the joy too. We gotta, why are we
Yeah.
conditioned to believe that we should always be focusing on looking and sounding and being younger, in our bodies? And like, why not celebrate that we're getting older and wiser and more joyful with
Yes.
every
My grandma,
little fun line and wrinkle that joins our bodies.
my grandmother, she will be 97 this year. She remembers
Oh
everything.
wow.
Like she
Oh
just
my God.
stopped driving maybe like 2 years ago. And she's constantly is like, you are so young, you have so much time. Like she often says that. And I'm like, wow, when you do get to like 90 plus, like you look at, you know, a 40-year-old, 38-year-old, and you're just like, that's nothing. You know, like there's so
Yeah.
much you still have left to learn. Um,
Yeah.
and I love that context that she always like brings to our conversations, because I'm thinking like, oh, I should have figured that out, you know, at this time. And she's like, you're still young. And I'm like, yeah. She's cute. She's cute.
Something that you were saying, Devin, just that term delight and, the notion of pleasure and joy. And I think, is it Adrienne Marie Brown that talks
Uh-huh.
about
Pleasure activism.
pleasure as a part of
Mhm.
liberation and social change work? And I think that so often gets lost because we're so focused on the again, on the deficits, on the negativity, on that negative space. And yes, we want to acknowledge it's not about having toxic positivity, right? But it's about how are we courageously and unabashedly imagining the future state? Because if we can't imagine it, how do we will it into being?
Mm-hmm.
And that requires us to have joy and to be delightful. And yet, I think sometimes that can be misconstrued, in the public eye. And I'm just wondering, um, where have you seen Jasmin and Devin, maybe this notion of uh, linking justice with joy misunderstood or misrepresented? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, right now, I know we're talking about um, gender equity, and I'm thinking a lot about reproductive justice, like with that question. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Inevitably, there are so many layers, right, to that conversation. We're talking about people's bodies
Yeah.
at the end of the day. And I think that, I don't know, this is so nuanced because I think about how much, um, like in my research at least, I've asked people to define joy, and they inevitably turn to like motherhood or um, what their mother taught them. Like I just talked about my grandma, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
this example of how bodies have existed or been understood. Like I think about my grandmother's um, agency in this world, like was so different than what I've thought about. Like I've never for a second thought I needed certain things in order to survive. I know that there's things I need to survive, but they're much different than like my grandparents who are significantly older than I am. And so um, I want to say this is all like very familial. Like people get confused when you
Mm-hmm.
talk about the familial aspects, like how does my family respond to joy? How does my upbringing help me make sense of joy? Can my mom define joy without talking about
Mm-hmm.
me as her child? Or if I can't have children or something, or if I choose not to have a child, are people going to have a misconception of how I make sense of joy? Like there's all
Mm-hmm.
of those questions that people get confused about. I often like, and I don't know this for fact, but I think a lot about this with like white women particularly. I'm just being very candid. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that I think are very much aware of their privilege until they have kids, and then it's like I don't want my child to have less in this life, and so therefore it becomes this like like their perceptions of liberation for the other communities, right? It shifts to some degree because it's like I have a child, I care about my child, I want them to have all the advantages in the world. And this competition happens and survival of the fittest, right?
Yeah.
Um, I don't know that for fact. Like I don't want to like lean into any examples, but I think often like I love my family. That's it. That's all that I'm coming from with this how I make sense of justice. And so therefore I'm going to fight for justice in this way. Um, I don't want to get too deep, but I am thinking about my grandmother has passed away and like she died from a distracted driver. And
Mm. Oh
my
my
family
gosh.
was in like a mediation. They were talking about money a lot. And I was just like, that's how we talk about justice. Like,
Mm.
in our country, that's how we justify harm or pain, right? And my granddad, he was just like, he didn't say true justice is her being back. He was like, but I'd want that over any money. Like he said that
Mm.
to my mom and all her siblings. Like, I don't care about this. I care more about her being here. She's not. Like, and
Yeah.
so just the joy of our world, her, and the way that they would justify that joy moving forward was so entangled in like this, money, how much, and all this different kind of stuff.
Mm.
So that's always like for me been a really challenging thing to navigate, like because it moves away from people's humanity. And like I said, like my why is to always amplify our humanity. And so I'm like, always in process of trying to figure that out. A lot of deep answers right there. I think I'm just the top of my head, but that is not an easy question. Like to figure
Yeah,
out
I know.
what
I'm throwing
joy,
some curveballs at you.
how they're linked, you know? And I do feel like I asked that question in my research, and it does become a ramble. And I think that's because there's never time to process it. Like there's
Yeah.
never opportunity to really like, let me think through that. Let me like be curious with my thoughts because I don't know yet. Like there's no opportunity to really do that. So like it becomes like, thanks for giving me the space and the freedom. Like that makes me just, that does bring me joy, just being able to ramble. Like
Yes.
I'm sure there's concrete answers. Jasmine's gonna give them to you.
No, I'm not. But when I was thinking about kind of what that question means for me, and I think again, I've been doing a lot of reflection. I think for so long we have these narratives that have been imposed on us so much that it's been internalized and ingrained. And I think for me, I'm at a place where I'm trying to separate that voice from my voice. And so for me, when I think about joy and justice, it's making space for me to figure out what that is. I think I shared with both you all too, like sometimes we get so ingrained with the work that we don't necessarily tap into the creativity and just, Black people as a community, as a culture, we are creativity. And so for me, taking some time to explore what that looks like is what I've done. I think the other piece is being able to kind of give yourself some checks and balances. So, just also having some type of discipline and understanding and grace around what you need to do to accomplish the thing or accomplish the goal, be it rest, be it, a paper, be it, preparing for curriculum, whatever that may be. But again, really taking that time to figure out what are these parameters I need to set for myself. What does joy have to look like for me? What does success look like for me? So just even going back to what I thought my journey was going to be in higher education versus what it has transformed into. When I first started out, I was listening more to other voices versus now I can hear myself. And I think that alone is a part of the justice work that I think particularly Black women have really started to tap into more and more, which I think is such a beautiful thing. And it's also interesting to see the more I feel we start to tap into those spaces of community of other Black women, there's other people in our spaces that are trying to challenge that in different ways, trying to challenge that. They're trying to suggest that it's not, healthy or safe. And I would argue that that is the safest place for Black women to be right now.
I wanted to revisit, kind of amplify something you said, Jasmine. It really struck me that we often spend so much time listening to others telling us who we should be and how we should be. And it requires a lot of boundary setting and space and like self-love to listen to our own voices. And I think that's something that, you know, probably all women to some extent struggle with. I certainly do. And even when I have the self-awareness to know how I've been gaslit, how these messages have been so deeply embedded inside me that I don't even know how they're impacting me. Even with that self-knowledge, it doesn't mean that I don't continue to fall prey to it, right? Because we're just we're so conditioned, so deeply conditioned. It takes a lot of mental and emotional and physical energy to create the space to listen to our own voices and to have the confidence to allow those voices to lead us to where we should be, right? I'm wondering, Devin, how that resonates with you, and how have you, are there practices that have helped you to sustain that listening to your truth, to your own voice?
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely in therapy. And I've been for a long time.
Oh yeah.
And it's so good and rich. And even if I did not have some of the just things in my life that have impacted me choosing that avenue, I think it would still be worthwhile. I have a therapist that reminds me often to be curious with myself. And so a lot of that is giving myself permission to ask a question and not know the answer, right? Like I think that there is I share this often, like I think that like as a Black woman, I perform extroversion really well. I am not an extroverted person. Like I really do need time to not hurry my joy, not hurry my thoughts. But I learned that if I want to survive, if I want to be portrayed as someone with not an attitude, or you name it, like I have to be more extroverted. And so I like that my therapist reminds me to give myself permission to like not know or be still or just communicate to myself my need in that moment. This is so silly, but I love to cut up fruit. That's like one of the most um
Bring some fruit to you.
yeah, no, seriously,
I'm
because
learning so much today
I
about
think
you.
I know. Well, I think it's because like I am trying my best to get away from feeling like I need to be productive, but that is not easy. Like it is a practice, and so if I don't get some of my dissertation written, if I don't finish responding to every last dozen emails that I have, I can cut up fruit that will nourish my body for myself and like remind me of like provision and remind me of like and I can't move, right? You got to pay attention. Like you're using a big old knife, like, like, or for me, like cutting apples, like for them, you got to make sure they're clean. Like there's so many things I'm doing that are like for me, but it's still productive. So I feel like I'm like not completely like, just stop, like being productive. You don't have to all the time. Go take a nap. I know nap ministry would say like you can just do that. But for me, it's like this is a process. So let me just cut my fruit. And then I admire it literally the entire week. I'm like, remember that time you took care of yourself. Remember that this is delicious. Like I have my moments where I'm eating my fruit and I'm like, this tastes so good. If it's emotion that I'm struggling to have come out, often working out will push that out. And it could be I'm angry, it could be I'm sad, it could be a number of things, but it's like I need my body to match it. And so, um, yeah, do
Yeah.
like a kickboxing class.
Yes.
Ooh, so feels so good. Like let's go. Like it's just a bag that I'm beating up, but it feels like liberating. Yoga often like it opens up, certain
Hmm.
chakras that I have just ignored. Even the internal dialogue you do during like a bar or yoga class of just like,
Hmm.
oh, my balance sucks right now. Why can't I have my balance? I wish I had my balance better. Like it's like just knowing like I maybe didn't accomplish it, but
Yeah.
I'm still living. Like, I don't know, walking out of
Right.
class knowing that feels good.
I love the sheer simplicity of the practices. And that's something that I've seen and heard from so many women, when I've been at conferences or panel discussions talking about gender equity issues. And we'll talk about these like big, complicated social constructs. But what it really boils down to, where the energy gets the highest in the conversation, is when people start talking about what are the things that you are doing in your daily life, the rituals that give you
Yeah.
joy, that help you to recenter and find that voice. And it's so fascinating to me that just over and over again, I hear the same things from women. It is, it's connection with family. It is taking time to do those small practices like cooking or making something
Yeah.
that can then be provided to others, right? And then the physical activity, right? Whether that is like hardcore working out or just going for a walk or yoga or deep breathing, but there's what always what I hear replicated in a lot of those rituals is the ability to be fully focused and present on the thing that you are
Yeah.
doing.
So again, back to that productivity, I think a lot of times we have messages that we have to go, 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 which again is how supremacy shows up. It's constantly what can you produce in this world? And so kind of taking that and flipping on its head is like, what can you what can you do to produce in this world that serves you and other people in a way that's revolutionary? And sometimes that production is rest. You can't pour from an empty cup. If you're not resting, if you're not regenerating, if you're not taking time to restore yourself, how can you show up for yourself and others? And so I think that that's a huge piece. And then also getting back to that familial connection too, sharing that with community. So again, my journey has been very interesting growing up in St. Louis and deciding to do DEI work and then really understanding what it means. And it really happened for me in the wake of the Mike Brown murder, right? When I was starting to do DEI work on a full-time basis, um, understanding I didn't know anything. I thought I knew, I didn't even have a clue into what work needs to happen around social change, which again to me is very different. There's a conflated message around how we define and do DEI work versus social change and justice work. I think DEI is a start. I think social change and justice is the end goal. But I think oftentimes folks think that they're a lot further along than where they actually are. And so for me, like I said, it's building the plane and flying at the same time. So what does this journey look like for me where I'm also trying to take others along that journey? And so just getting back to the piece of taking time for myself. To Devin's point, I am a hardcore introvert as well. And I think we are in positions where we have to have that extroverted personality. And so just taking time and acknowledging that's where I'm at and making sure that I carve out time for myself so I can regenerate and regroup. So just finding those moments to, I guess, recalibrate the filters that we have on what productivity can look like, what rest can look like, what joy can look like. And just even acknowledging the balance between, joy and pain, if you will, too, because I think that's another part of our journeys too. Like we have a lot of pain that we're trying to explore and navigate too. And so you can't necessarily think about the joy without understanding that piece of your life too.
And
So
thinking about what you were saying, Jasmin, about how sometimes people think they're further along in the journey than they actually are. And I certainly know now, looking back at where I was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that I was one of those people who thought I was a lot further along in terms of my evolution and my knowledge and my, understanding of these things than now when I look back and realize, oh, wow, I just didn't know what I didn't know. Um, so I guess, when we think about a a call to action. The calls to action are obviously going to be quite different depending on the identities we live in. And so I'm wondering if you could kind of summarize what is the call to action for women who are a part of the global majority, who have been on the receiving end of the highest amounts of oppression and pain, and what is the call to action for uh, white women? What is the call to action for men to continue doing the work that is needed, recognizing that we may not be as far along on the journey as we think we are?
and so what I often tell people is like, who are you and what are you when no one's there? Like, who do you want to be when no one's listening, when no one's watching? Um, how do you, I guess, interpret your existence in the US context, right? Like, how do you understand your existence in the US context? How are you taking ownership of that reality, right? And then what then becomes your role or your agency in spaces, whether it is your community, whether it's your, that family unit, if you have, whether it is your job or professional space. I think that the journey, particularly for Black women, looks completely different than others in society in the moment because, again, we constantly see examples of harm and violence imposed against us. And so I think for us is that, how do we define joy? How do we define resistance? How do we define rest? It has to be a very personal journey. But I'm at the point now, I'm not hard not going to be taking people along the journey for them. If you are not doing the work, that is between you and whatever entity you respond to. And so that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I really appreciate too that point that you made about honoring where we are and what we have energy for, because not every day can or should be the day that we're front and center. And so we have to recognize when, no, today's the day that I don't have it in me to, I don't have the patience. I don't have the level of empathy that would be required for this to be a fruitful experience. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Devin?
I think about the lessons in my life that have given me permission to know or learn or be in my joy unapologetically. I don't have to answer to anybody about that. I really am not worried if you find out about this. Like I don't care if you're aware that I danced to WAP when it came out. Like I'm not just, you know what I'm saying? Like for whatever reason, it's like, oh, you can't talk about that at work. I'm gonna talk about it at work. I'm gonna talk about it with my students. Like, let's talk about the intellectual side of it or just the pleasure side of it. Like it should not be something that I should be worried about. I'm bringing that back to consciousness as an example, but it's just there's a lot of mediocre shit essentially that I'm just kind of like, I gotta let it be where it's at. And so my call to action really is like people being a little bit more self-reflective about what they're contributing. Like if you, like Jasmin said, contributed absolutely nothing, know that you did that and shut up. Like don't be jumping up in leadership roles and positions if you really haven't done the work.
And I also need you to stop making excuses for why you're not leading well. Like I think that's another piece too. How many stories do we have to keep duplicating and sharing for you to take some freaking action and you have the audacity to call yourself a leader, right? Like that's the piece too for me is like, I don't need you to feel sorry for me. I need you to take some action. I don't need to keep re-traumatizing myself. Like I want you to hear my story. I want you to understand what my perspective is. And if you continue to ask me that and you've done nothing with it, I need you to get out of my face. Like that's the other piece I'm at now. Like I am, and I guess where that those emotions and kind of frustration comes because we've had so many amazing, particularly Black women scholars who've been sharing what this work can look like and essentially the cheat code. And yet and still in certain spaces, academia is one of the main ones. We constantly have folks, well, I don't know what to do, or we couldn't find anybody, or we just don't understand why they didn't want to stay. You have never set this space up to honor the people you are inviting in to do the work for you, right? Yeah. And so I think that's another thing that I'm really trying to kind of, at least for my journey, like distinguish between what does DEI, how's DEI work set up now versus what it needs to be long term.
I'm so deeply grateful to both of you for coming on and sharing your insights, your wisdom, your joy. And also thanks to Devin's therapist for giving us some good pointers at life. Yeah, I think a couple of highlights for me from our conversation today is just the acknowledgement that this is so complex and it is a lifelong journey slash trial that we're experiencing. But when we break it down to the simplicity of being fully present and being unashamed our in owning our space and ourselves, our fullest selves, and not letting anyone take that from us and not giving what we don't need to give.
Yeah.
That's the purest form of liberation, right?
Yeah.
There are spaces that exist too, right? Like I think I know just being on this journey now and I will say I do miss higher ed. I do intend to come, but I think a lot of times, sometimes there is this space of hopelessness, particularly for folks who are from, minoritized backgrounds, that can be very sad too. And I know that we have to do better with sharing the community and the love and the spaces that do exist that welcome us authentically. And I think that that is something that is achievable, right? I think we have to stay vigilant wherever we are, and at the same time know that not all spaces are intentionally harmful, right? But we just have to work a little harder to find out where they are and create them. So
I
I
always,
don't know. Go
oh,
ahead,
good.
Devin.
No, I
Mhm.
always think about this Harriet Tubman quote. Um, I don't know, people always react when you say Harriet Tubman because it just is like, oh, this is deep. Uh, but she says, I grew up like a neglected weed, ignorant of liberty, having no experience of it. And I don't know why, when I think of like those words, neglected weed, weeds are already not the most sexy thing. But they're still neglected. Um, that's how she felt as a woman, as a Black woman. And then when she was born, liberty was not, it was so clear. This is liberation and this is not. So she was ignorant of liberty, didn't have perceptions of what it would be, and yet freed, you know what I'm saying, slaves. It's like you were neglected and you didn't know what this was, and yet you still did. Like to me, like there's so much power in just doing what you know for yourself is well and good and right, right?
Mhm.
Like, and so there are parts of my existence that will be neglected, probably by those in various different positions, whether you're a privileged position or not. Um, there are parts of my liberation that I'm still trying to be informed by that I don't know, right? Ignorant of liberty. I don't even know how to get there. And yet there's some capacity that I have, similar to Harriet Tubman, to do some really cool things, like come what may. That gives me a lot of joy. Like when Martin Luther King says, be the best street sweeper, it's just like maybe today the street sweeping I do is rest. You know, today the street sweeping I do is this podcast. Like I'm gonna give it my very best. And that has to be good and okay. But yeah, I always think about that when I think of liberation. It's just like Harriet Tubman using this very poetic language to talk about like, yo, I don't even know what I was doing or how I did it, or but I did it. Like it just feels so like foreign to some degree,
Mm,
because we know so much more and can do so much more. And yet we're still so like timid in our approach, or we can see when it's not happening. It's just like, just be in your body, be with yourself, know what you know,
yeah.
and bring another partner along with you, you know, as you figure it out.
Yeah.
But this was good.
Thank
This
you
was
both so
amazing.
much. Thank you. Thank you. And I want to also thank you for being the guests on our 100th episode of Culture
Congratulations.
Stew.
Yeah,
I,
congratulations, Maria.
That's a
That's
I
lot.
could
fantastic.
not imagine a better way for us to kick off this new season and celebrate our 100th episode than have you both with us. So thank you, Jasmine Robinson and Devin Moran,
A
for
lot
coming
episode.
on the podcast.
Absolutely. It's been an honor, and I'm excited to see what comes next. So thank you for having both of us on here.
Yes. Very excited. So grateful. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to the Culture Stew podcast. This episode was produced by MSM Global Consulting and edited by Robert Gratz. Interested in learning more? You can subscribe to Culture Stew on any major podcast platform and catch the video versions on our YouTube channel at MSM Global Consulting. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at www.msmglobalconsulting.com and follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram for more insights and updates. If you find this podcast valuable, please share it with your friends and colleagues. Until next time, y'all, take care.